Buongiorno, buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti a questo nuovo appuntamento con i Development Webinars. Oggi parliamo di BERS, chiedo scusa, c'è un'interferenza. Ecco, eccoci qua. Welcome, morning everyone. Welcome to the second appointment with the EBRD. Today topic is the procurement of services, and we are very excited to have with us Joan Burt, the interim director of the EBRD. So let's jump in and we have a quick look at the program. There will be introductory remarks by Marco Ragusa, who needs no introduction, from OICE. Then we will have, as usual, a very robust session of Q&A. So don't be shy, take this chance and feel free to ask Joan anything about the EBRD procurement. In the end, we will have some wrapping up by Roberto Lovato, the head of the Italian Trade Agency Office for Partnerships and International Organizations. And that's it. As usual, the presentations will be available later on today. And as we will also have the presentation of Joan, which will be shared. So far is everything. I'll leave it to Marco now for a couple of introductory remarks. And Marco, then please pass the word to Joan for his presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. First of all, I would like to thank Joan Bert for your availability to be our special guest of the webinar. As you know, Joan, OICE is the association representing Italian engineering, architectural, and technical economic consulting organizations. Over 400 member companies with a total turnover of 3.5 billion euros. 60% of this production value is made outside Italy. We are third in the world after US and China for number of firms with projects outside home country. In fact, 12 Italian companies are included in the ENR top 225. Eastern Europe, Mediterranean, Africa, and Central Asia are our geographic priorities, and we know that EBRD is operating across these three continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia, to further progress towards market-oriented economies and the promotion of private and entrepreneurial initiative. In 2019, the EBRD awarded 2,412 consultancy contracts for an overall value of 172.3 million euros. The contracts awarded to Italian consulting companies were 90 for a value of about 6.4 million euros, equal to 3.7% of the total amount. Italy ranked fourth for contract assignments after Great Britain, Germany, and Romania. And an increasing number of our companies present today can also provide consultancy services directly to the bank in order to prepare and develop banks' projects and activities. OICE, as association, sustains the participation of the Italian consulting companies to the tenders organized by the international financial institution as EBRD, but also World Bank, IFTB, ADB, IDB, and so on. And we develop contacts and networking with foreign partners within the cooperation with our homologous associations in the world. So, John, today's webinar is very important for us in order to develop interest in the bank and obviously refresh for many of our participants the procurement procedures. Now, please allow me to spend some words in Italian to our companies. Per gli associati e OICE, l'iniziativa che facciamo oggi con la BERS e per la quale ringrazio e ringraziamo come associazione l'ICE e in particolare Roberto Lovato e Bernard Prevete, fa seguito a diverse attività di informazione, formazione e promozione presso la banca che abbiamo fatto naturalmente sempre con il Ministero degli Affari Esteri e l'ICE. Abbiamo svolto delle visite settoriali nel 2018 e nel 2019 con le società OICE proprio nel headquarters della EBRD a Londra, che hanno avuto l'opportunità di presentare la loro expertise ai banker e di ricevere da loro pipeline di progetti settoriali e geografici. È molto importante sapere che la consulenza italiana è ben percepita nell'ambito dell'attività della banca e le diverse iniziative servono senz'altro a consolidare, a rafforzare la presenza delle nostre società nell'ambito delle aggiudicazioni della BERS. Ho già poc'anzi fornito dei dati riguardo il nostro posizionamento nel ranking della EBRD. Ritorno solo su un punto. L'obiettivo dell'iniziativa di oggi è quello di aggiornare la conoscenza delle procedure di procurement, ma anche quello di aggregare il know-how di chi già lavora con la banca e le expertise specifiche di chi non è ancora operativo in questo campo. Purtroppo non possiamo farlo ancora in presenza, ma come OICE siamo disponibili con in testa il vicepresidente Roberto Carpaneto, che oggi purtroppo non è qui, ci siamo sia come punto di contatto sia come catalizzatore di queste attività. Quindi vi ringrazio e auguro a tutti buon lavoro and please Joan, thank you again and the floor is yours.
Thank you. If I can ask Bernard to bring up the slide presentation. I'd originally intended to run the presentation myself, but overnight a Windows update happened, and as we all know, the best way to get something completely messed up is for Windows to do an update. Can I have the next slide, Bernard, please? Thank you. I would like to start out by painting a picture of you of the overall EBRD consultancy framework. It is important to understand that EBRD runs two major streams of procurement for consultancy services, and they are run by separate functions. On the one hand, we have the procurement operations and delivery department, which is my current home. Which runs and manages all consultancy contracts that are contracted directly by the bank. It is subject to its own set of procedures, which is called the Corporate Procurement Policy, or CPP. I will be using that abbreviation a lot. On the other hand, there are client contracted consultancy, and these are run by PPAD, the Procurement Policy and Advisory Department, which is a department that I'm normally attached to, but I'm currently on secondment from PPAD to POD. So in a way, I have a leg in both departments. This is run by a combination of, on the one hand, a policy unit to which I normally belong, and a series of business procurement specialists. The policy that governs client contracted is called the Procurement Policies and Rules, PPNR. Again, this is an abbreviation that I will be using quite a lot. Now, while we do have two separate policies, there is a degree of alignment when it comes to consultancy contract procurement, and I will get into that furthermore when I do the presentation. In terms of competitive selection, the single stage open competitive selection with technical and financial proposal has now become our main competitive selection method. And this is since 2017, when they were jointly introduced into the PPNR and the CPP at the latest revision. There is also a generalization of electronic procurement, and we use two systems. PPAD uses ESEP, and POD uses SMART, which is a software as a service provided by GEP. ESEP has been running for about 5 years now. SMART, on the other hand, has been introduced only in October 2020 and is replacing the system which was called eSelection, which a number of you might be familiar with. A big chunk of my presentation actually contains a how-to instruction with the essentials of registering in SMART and ESEP and being able to locate opportunities for competitive selections in both SMART and ESEP. While these slides take up a considerable amount of space, I will be able to go through them quite quickly because there's no point in me repeating to you what you can read on screen, and I understand that the presentation will be distributed among the participants after. Bernard, can I have the next slide, please? Right. So where are the business opportunities? And here I am focusing essentially on public sector, which is where a good chunk of EBRD's consultancy work goes, and which you as an association of consulting engineers are probably most interested in, because this mostly concerns infrastructure works. So how does this work? The EBRD will provide financing, an investment project. When it comes to public sector, this will usually be a loan. There are some alternatives. We have equity. We have also a number of cases where we work through local banks, which we call participating financial institutions, to extend loans to local clients. So there is a form of indirect financing. We use consultancy services for the project preparation, and you should keep in mind, in essence, when it comes to project preparation, that always tends to be bank contracted. Once we are past the point where we start the implementation of the project, we also have consultancy services for the project implementation. Could be FIDIC engineering, could be project implementation support units, could be corporate development. These are normally client contracted. Occasionally, EBRD will also use external consultants as lenders supervisors. This is again bank contracted. Now, I mentioned this bank contracted and client contracted. This is essential to determine whether something will be client contracted and bank contracted, is essentially an internal EBRD process. By the time the opportunity comes to the market, that determination has already been made, and in 99.999% of cases that will not change. I'm not saying 100% because I've been in this business for 21 years, and I have learned never to say categorically, no, that is never going to happen. But it is extremely rare that there is a switch somewhere in the middle. So this is internal, purely internal to EBRD. We make the determination. Bernard, can I have the next slide, please? Right, I'm going to start off with my current home, which is the EBRD Corporate Procurement Department. It is called the Procurement Operations and Delivery Department, in abbreviation POD. It's about 25 to 30 procurement staff. Why am I being so imprecise? Is because on account of COVID and the fact that we have switched to a new system, we have had an influx of temporary staff, some of which may stay, some of which may not stay. But that is about the size of the department that we are working with. We are governed by the corporate procurement policy, and the corporate procurement policy essentially contains two work streams. The first is goods, works, services, and consultancy services for the corporate needs of the bank. In essence, this is the kind of goods, works, and services that are necessary for the operation of any enterprise. Classics are IT services, classics are facilities management. Our two biggest projects on this account is currently a multi-year investment project for IT, by which we hope to modernize our IT infrastructure, and the new headquarters building, because EBRD's rent on its current HQ is going to run out end of 2022, and we will be moving to a new HQ still based in London as of 1st of January 2023. This is the corporate side of things. Consultancy services for the bank's project needs. This is probably what you are mostly interested in, and this is also by number of contracts the biggest part of the corporate procurement of POD's work. Marco was kind enough to recite some of the numbers for 2019. Very recently, they have not been published yet, so you get this here in Premier. We have the new numbers for 2020, and for the first time in my 15 years in the bank, we have actually seen a considerable drop in both the number and the value of consultancy contracts which were awarded. We've gone from about 2,400 to about 2,000, and from about 135 million to about 110 million. I do not see this as a permanent downward trend, because you may have noticed that 2020 was quite a special year, because a lot of the drop in consultancy assignments, in my view, is due to two reasons. The first is a lot of our consultancy work involves field work, which involves traveling, international traveling, and that has been severely curtailed by the COVID pandemic. The second is that in 2020, the bank made a temporal switch in its business model. Rather than invest in new projects, we used most of our financial firepower to support existing clients, usually through a series of bridging credits. And because these are existing clients, they are known to us, we had a reduction in the number of consultancy assignments, for instance, for due diligence that we needed to conduct. Very important to remember, POT, procurement under POT, uses two funding sources, the bank's administrative budget and donor funding. Regardless of the type of funding, our processes and procedures are the same, especially since 2015, the bank no longer uses tied funding. All our donor funding is untied. Just to give you an idea of the proportions, and this has not fluctuated. Over the course of the years, about 90% of the value of our consultancy contracts for project support are donor funded. May fluctuate, sometimes it's 88%, sometimes it's 91%, but 90% is what we are looking at. Who are our donors? The European Union is an important donor. We have a number of in-house multilateral donor funds, which is basically a fund set up by EBRD, which donors subscribe to. In other words, we go to them with an offer. Are they interested? They sign on the dotted line. They contribute to this fund. And then, of course, we have a great number of bilateral donor agreements with, amongst others, Italy, almost every European Union country, and surprisingly also a number of our countries of operations, such as Kazakhstan, Turkey, and a number of others. To give you a rough idea, in the more than 30 years that EBRD has existed, apparently we have signed about 920 separate donor agreements, of which it's a rough guess because we don't really know, about 400 are still active in one form or the other. But again, as I mentioned, regardless of who the donor is, our processes and procedures are the same. Next slide, please, Bernard. What are the principles of EBRD's corporate procurement? These are clearly set out in our in the CPP: transparent, fair, and open procurement practices, non-discrimination, value for money, sustainability, quality of results, contractual protection for both the bank and the consultant, and especially the timely supply of the goods or the completion of the works, services, or consultancy services. I would just like to go a bit deeper into a couple of these. Value for money through efficient, effective, and economic use of resources. So we do aim for efficiency, effectiveness, and economy, which are the three big E's. From my point of view, and from the point of view of most of our users, efficiency is probably the most important. I was on a similar seminar with German consultants yesterday, and the question came up, yes, but how about the price disadvantage of, in that particular case, German consultants? We can probably have the same question about any Western European or North American consultants. Efficiency matters for us. As this may surprise you, but as head of the procurement department, I do not see it as my role to cut costs to the absolute minimum. But as you are all aware, you've all worked for organizations. How does this go? Frontline staff comes up with a baseline number, bottoms up figuring. They think that they cannot present this number to their management, so they cut off 10%. That manager thinks he cannot produce that number to his manager, so he cuts off 10%, etc., etc., etc. It is something that I constantly struggle with and constantly struggle against, because in my view, especially donors are more willing to pay 500,000 for something than 250,000 for nothing, essentially. And it is something that needs to be constantly, that we constantly need to remind our user teams of, because the B in EBRD stands for bank, which means that we have a lot of finance people. And as far as finance people are concerned, less money is better. In my view, as the procurement and somebody with a lot of experience in technical assistance, the right amount of money is better. Not too much, not too little. Ideally, you get it right. Non-discrimination in selection of suppliers. As I mentioned, the EBRD, contrary to, say, the World Bank, is open to consultants, service providers from any country in the world, not just our member countries, not just our countries of operation. which means that, for instance, a consultant based in Afghanistan, I'm mentioning this country because it's the first in the drop-down list of nationalities, and people often make the mistake when designating, oh yeah, this is an Afghan consultant. It's very rare. We've never had any Afghan consultants, but basically we are open to all nationalities, subject to a couple of requirements, and then transparent, open, fair and open procurement practices. We are a publicly funded institution, and therefore, despite this being called corporate procurement, we are still very much attached to the principles of public procurement. Bernard, can I have the next slide, please? As I said, there are some criteria with regard to eligibilities. First of all, nationality does not matter. This is in terms of national origin. However, we work in particular countries, and this may mean that for particular assignments, we may require local expertise. And this local expertise may necessitate the involvement of local firms, if that's where the expertise is. But again, we do not put any restrictions on the nationality. If an Italian firm is capable of providing local expertise without having recourse to a local firm as a subcontractor, that is fine. Conditions to contract award, we try to limit those to the essentials. To ensure that the firm is capable on a legal, financial, commercial, and technical level to fulfill the contracts. However, if a firm has done something very, very bad, which is to say that they have been declared ineligible under our enforcement policies and procedures, usually means that we have clear proof of fraud, corruption, collusion, theft, or other unlawful forms of influencing, then they would be excluded. I would like to add to this, you may be aware that the multilateral development banks have an agreement on mutual enforcement of their debarment decisions, which means that in principle, if say the World Bank debars a firm for a duration of more than 1 year, we will automatically also debar that firm. Why only from 1 year? Because MDBs being MDBs, by the time somebody's made a decision, somebody's communicated the decision has been communicated to us, and we have made our own decision. Usually the year is already pretty much gone. Second issue, when there is a conflict of interest or an unfair competitive advantage. These restrictions are more relative in the sense that if a firm is debarred under the EPP, no ifs, no buts, you're out. If there is a conflict of interest or an unfair competitive advantage, we look at this and we see if it can be mitigated. Conflicts of interest can be mitigated, unfair competitive advantage can be mitigated. For instance, in the case of unfair competitive advantage, prior involvement, we look at whether we can neutralize the advantage from the prior involvement through disclosing as much information as possible. For instance, if prior involvement resulted in deliverables, we would like to present the deliverable. We would add the deliverables. Again, if in our view, this is sufficient to neutralize the competitive advantage. Just releasing deliverables is not always sufficient because deliverables usually only reflect part of the work that has been done. And then finally, if you have been really, really bad, up to the level where the UN is starting to take notice and has imposed sanctions on a firm or an individual on the basis of Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, you are not allowed in either. So, and again, to reemphasize conflict of interest, what do we see as conflict of interest? Affiliation with the beneficiary of the services or bank staff, conflict with another assignment, and conflict with other business activities. Example of the last, for instance, if you are a firm and you are making recommendations as to what type of equipment should be purchased, and it just so happens that you are recommending the type of equipment that you yourself are manufacturing, that is, in our view, a clear conflict of interest and should not be allowed. Next slide, please, Bernard. Right. This is essentially a repetition of the first slide, and I'm repeating it here because it is so very important to keep in mind that we have two separate departments with two separate tracks, two separate systems, and two separate policies. Well, actually, the only crossover between the two is me, because normally I'm in one, but I'm temporarily in the other. Next slide, please, Bernard. So, who engages consultants? Bank using administrative budget or donor funds under the CPP. the bank's clients using EBRD managed donor funds or loan proceeds under the PPNR. And then there is the third, and I've put this in gray because it is to a large extent very not too relevant to the bank, but it can be very relevant to the consultancy industry. The bank's clients using alternative sources of funding, such as other loans, other donors, or own resources, and they use other procurement rules. These can be other donors, these can be their own corporate procurement rules or public procurement rules or anything else. I am highlighting this because I would like to emphasize that when it comes to the level of consultancy services that are being provided in relation to EBRD projects, what the bank funds either directly or indirectly, it's not even the majority. For instance, what we need to keep in mind is that when it comes to, especially the use of donor funds, this is based to a large extent on affordability, which means that very little donor funding is used to support consultancy in private sector projects, which, let's not forget it, makes up about 80% of the EBRD's business volume. However, it does not mean that those projects do not need technical expertise or support. On the contrary, they probably do. So when you think about working in projects that are related to EBRD financed projects, there is, of course, what EBRD funds directly, but there is also what our clients need. And for that reason alone, it can actually be quite useful to keep an eye out on what EBRD does in terms of general project financing. Next slide, please. So how is this working out? When EBRD is contracting the consultants, which is the case of the corporate procurement policy applies, EBRD has a consultancy contract with a consultant. Consultant sends us their invoice, presents the deliverables to us, and we make a payment to directly to the consultant. Our consultancy contract has undergone a major refurb back in 2020. It was one of the things that I worked on when I was appointed interim acting director of POT. We tried to remove a lot of the friction points which we have seen in some of our under the old contract template, which, to be fair, has essentially been in place unchanged since I joined the EBRD in 2006. It is probably still not what a consultant would like to see when they come in, because we are an international financial institution and therefore have a number of peculiarities. We also work on better reflecting donor requirements, which are not necessarily related to eligibility on the basis of nationality. But for instance, when it comes to the European Union, they may have specific reporting requirements, specific publicity requirements, and so on, which we try to push through. We've now been using this for about 9 months. And in a way, what I expected was what the friction points that still exist, which I expected to revise, are still there. And we are working on trying to reduce these. Although in some cases, it's simply not going to be possible. Can I have the next slide, please? Right. Here, I'm just going to give an overview of our main selection processes, and these are valid for both the EBRD, when the EBRD is the contracting party, or when the clients are our contracting party. So for anything less than 75,000 euros, we can do direct selection. We pick a consultant, usually through the teams. We ask them to submit some basic information, qualification questionnaire to make sure that they meet basic eligibility criteria, contract template, terms of reference. Consultants come back to us with a proposal, usually on pricing, and comments on the terms of reference. We negotiate. If we negotiate successfully, we get to the contract. Single stage open competitive selection, which can be used for anything above 75,000 euros. We publish a notice, and that the location of that notice has changed. I'll go into that in a second when it comes to when I will explain a bit more about SMART. We ask for a technical and financial proposal based on predetermined evaluation criteria, which are part of the request for proposal package. We select a consultant, enter into negotiations. If successful, issue a contract. If not, we move on to the next capable consultant on the list. And then we can have two-stage open competitive selection, which we use for 75,000 euros or above. and projects which are also complex. You might be familiar with this. This is what we used to use for everything above 300,000. Procurement notice, expression of interest results in a shortlist. On the basis of that shortlist, the up to 6 highest ranked receive an invitation to submit a full technical and financial proposal. If I have been hearing that industry is not particularly in love with the single stage open competitive selection. If you are not, this is your opportunity, because I'm the person who invented it and inserted this into both the CPP and the PPNR. This was in response to a request from our user departments who wanted to see full technical and financial proposals, but who wanted to get them faster. And shaving off about a month or 6 weeks by not doing a 2-stager was seen as added value by them. In some cases, they've started to roll back from that a little bit, because they have come to the conclusion that there is an important difference between looking through 10 expressions of interest and reading through 10 technical and financial proposal in terms of the time they have to invest. So I think there is a bit more of a balance. I think there's going to be a slight uptick in 2-stage open competitive selections as opposed to single stage. I know that we use for 2-stage open competitive the notion complex. I was asked a lot of questions about this when we introduced this in the policy, and my reply is, oh, complex is what you consider to be complex. Yeah, it is what it is. We just kept it in because people kept on clamoring for a clear distinction. When do we have to use 2-stage? When do we have to use single stage? And my reply, you don't have to worry. You want to use single stage, you use single stage. You want to use 2-stage, you want 2-stage. It is surprising that people do not believe that you give them the freedom to choose. So there we are. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, Jonah, on this slide, so basically the difference between the single stage and the 2-stage is that you need to submit the technical and financial proposal with the 2-stage. That's the main.
Now, the main difference is that on the 2-stage, the first stage is expressions of interest. On the basis of it, which are relatively summary. On the basis of expressions of interest, we make a short list of about 6. And these are invited for a technical proposal. Single stage, everybody who submits immediately submits a full technical and financial proposal.
Thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please. Right. So where do you find opportunities for suppliers and contractors? I'm going to start off with the corporate procurement. You go on our website, work with us, click on procurement. Corporate procurement and consultancy services. Next slide, please. Right. And when you go there, you see this big orange taskbar, this big orange bar that says view current goods, etc., etc. This will take you to the EBRD's GEP by Smart website. Why is this the case? Because Smart is software as a service. It is an externally provided electronic procurement platform, which is run by GEP, which is one of the major providers of e-procurement. And it is on their site. We use their platform, and we have a subdomain on their site, which is specifically dedicated to EBRD notices. Next slide, please. However, the most important thing that I would like to discuss with you here is registering. So for Smart by GEP, a bit like with this, you need to be registered. It has replaced e-selection since 8th of October 2020. Registration is possible. You can be invited by email. This often happens when a team says, well, we'd really like to make sure that this consultant is in our database or can participate in one of our competitions. And you may receive an email which will link you to the primary registration form, but you don't have to wait for an email. This is not by invitation. Anyone can register. You need to register, but you only need to register once per entity or person. I would like to emphasize per entity for the simple reason, if, for instance, we're talking about, say, the Big Four, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, PwC, KPMG. In the UK alone, Deloitte has, I think, 10 different entities. They need to register separately. This is on a provider basis. If you are a physical person or trade as a physical person, you also register. Can I have the next slide, please?
Can you see it?
Right.
It's
So
showing.
you will be taken to what is known as the, it seems to be a bit of overlap here. Okay, that's better. Thank you. The primary registration form, this is essentially where you fill in some essential data. Your company phone, the business region in which you wish to operate. One thing, although the system isn't linked to many other EBRD systems, one of the things that it has pulled through is a particular classification known as regional. This is something that has an internal EBRD meaning, but is not really relevant for the rest of the world. So if you work across multiple of more than one of our regions, do just not tick regional because it will not show up. Just tick every region in which you are interested. There is also a DUNS number. This is Dun and Bradstreet. This is a feature that comes automatically with the system. You don't have to fill it in. If you don't have a DUNS number, it doesn't matter. You do not have to fill it in. You do, however, need to include company identification. If you have a company registration number in your local jurisdiction, you have to enter this. If you're an individual, you still select company registration number and you enter your passport number to make sure that we are dealing with a real person and that we do not have any overlap. You can enter a primary contact. Primary contact person is the main person who is supposed to be the operator and which will receive most of the correspondence. Again, as with the selection, I would recommend that you make this at least for the email address an email address that multiple persons can have access to. Next slide, please. Primary registration can also include any number of secondary contacts. So for instance, if you're going to have multiple people who are going to be running selection processes under Smart, you can enter as many as you like. You can do this right away, or you can do this once you are registered. Finally, I have read and agreed GP terms and conditions and privacy policy. You tick the box, you click submit, and then we move on to the next slide. You will then receive an email with the link inviting you to the opening screen of GEP Smart. Now, this is an email which will come from a GEP.com domain, not an EBRD.com domain. It's an issue that we have encountered a couple of times in the past when people were going, is this spam because it says EBRD, but it doesn't come from EBRD. You can then log in with your user credentials, which will be the email of the primary contacts. Moving on to the next slide, please. And this will be your workspace. When you log in for the first time, you will have one task, which will be on the taskbar, and this will be to complete your registration process. Next slide, please. And this basically allows you to enter the basic details, identification information, any certificates you might have, such as any ISO certificate. Not everything in there is compulsory. It just comes standard feature. For instance, diversity status we are not looking for. You do not need to have everything in the profile filled in. Normally, when you register, your registration, once you have started completing the profile, will be reviewed by a member of our vendor management team. And if there is something missing there that we think is absolutely necessary, you will be invited. Why is this important? Because you can go from registered to approved. The important thing is any registered firm can basically participate in any selection. But to be awarded a contract and to be issued a contract, you need to be an approved vendor. Next slide, please. So again, this is a bit more information. 2 tips for working with Smart, and I have found this out the hard way. If you want to see some more options about what you can do, in the right-hand top of the screen, you see the 3 little dots. This actually takes you to the menu of available options. Took me a couple of days to find that out. One thing that took me a couple of hours to find out is when save frequently. The system works fine, but you probably want to save as frequently as possible. This is, by the way, a good tip for dealing with any form of IT program. Save, and then save some more. Next slide, please. Right. So how do you see the opportunities? This is where the big orange bar on our page takes you to, and this is what our information looks like. Now, you may notice that this is a lot more summary than what we used to have on the e-selection procurement notices. This has been feedback that we have received. If you are a registered consultant, there is no problem. You log in, you click on the link, and you can immediately see all the details. If you're not a registered consultant, but just want to have a peek around, there was not information there for you. Now, in response to this, we have come up with a way to present additional information, which is a very recent feature that we have developed together with GEP. We can add a small attachment, usually a Word document or a PDF, to the notice, and this is visible to everyone, even consultants who are not registered. You can click on this and you can immediately see, is this something that I would be interested in without the need for registration. We've piloted it with a couple of departments internally in the bank, and so far the feedback has been good. Next slide, please, Bernard. So, as I already mentioned, who engages consultant? Well, the bank's clients also engage consultants, and this is handled by, next slide, please. This is handled by the Procurement Policy and Advisory Department, in abbreviation PPAD. There are about 20 procurement professionals, which are divided among a policy unit, which is where I normally work, and 2 project implementation units. It's governed by the PPNR, the Procurement Policies and Rules, and covers goods, works, services, and consultancy service for project preparation and project implementation by the EBRD's clients. Just to be clear, this is for the EBRD's clients. They are responsible for the actual procurement, but the bank, the EBRD, the procurement units are always in the back and provide no objection. They do reviews of clients' proposals for decisions at important stages, such as shortlisting, such as technical evaluation, such as financial evaluation, such as contracting, such as major changes to the contract. These need to be reviewed and approved by EBRD before the client can move on to this. Funding sources, no administrative budget here, but EBRD loan funding and donor funding. Next slide, please. Right, so the procurement policies and rules, key principles: economy, efficiency, non-discrimination, transparency, and accountability. These, to a large extent, are quite similar to what EBRD is also promoting in the corporate procurement rules. Just some general facts: public sector contracting, 2.3 billion in 2019. Predominantly works contracts. In terms of the consultancy contracts, which are client contracted both by value and by number, this is a relatively small part in the overall PPNR, and it is also a relatively small part in the overall EBRD funding for consultancy services. To give you an idea, you're probably looking at something like 150 consultancy contracts per year, to the tune of about, in total, 10 to 15 million spread across those 150 contracts. Most of those are handled through a form of open competitive selection because their value exceeds 75,000. This is a bit different from corporate procurement policy, where most, by number, not by value, but by number, most of the contracts are awarded through direct selection because they are smaller assignments. Next slide, please. What is the structure? EBRD has a loan agreement. It's a loan or a grant agreement if we are talking about donor funds with the client. The client has a consultancy contract with the consultant, and the consultant sends their invoice to the client reviews, approves the invoice, sends it to us, and in most cases we make payment directly to the consultant. So without passing through the client, straight into the consultant's bank account. There are just a few exceptions to this rule. There is a financing structure which is known as special accounts, and this is usually in public sector with sovereign clients, which is to say at the state level, in which case a client creates a special account in which we make payments, and the client makes payments from that special account to the service providers. Why is this done? This hasn't really anything to do with EBRD preferences. This usually has to do with national rules for public financial management, which is, for instance, that if a state makes any financial disbursement or makes any financial commitments, it has to pass through an account controlled by that particular state. That is something that we cannot do very much about. This is in relation to any national legislation, which in some cases we can overrule through a sovereign loan agreement. In some cases, not so much. It happens, but especially for consultancy services, it is quite rare. But it does happen, just so that you are aware. Next slide, please.
John, I'm sorry, it's on this topic, a clarification. Does this system of payment work only for consultancy services or also for works, let's say?
Also for works. To the extent possible, we make disbursement directly into the accounts of contractors or consultants. Next slide, please. So where can you find the opportunities for client contracted goods, work, services, and consultancy services? You go on PPAD's webpage, where you can click on ESEP opportunities. Same principle applies. ESEP is a platform that's being run by an external service provider. It will take you to the site. On the procurement notices side, you will still find a number of procurement notices, some of which have expired a long time ago. I was at one point vaguely aware that they existed, and it all came into sharp contrast when, as I'm doing now, I'm working on the decommission of e-selection and the old internal systems, and we are figuring out a way of removing those expired procurement notices from the website. It's just one of the little hurdles that we've come across as part of our effort to come up with new systems. Next slide, please. This is the front page of ESEP. Again, you have registration and you have search for opportunities. You do not need to be registered to search for opportunities. You can have quite a lot of access to the opportunities that are available. However, if you wish to submit a proposal or a tender, you have to be registered. Next slide, please. You can click on register, and then you can click here to register. If you are already registered, you just go by your username and passport. Next slide, please. And this is essentially the front page of your registration. It is quite self-explanatory and intuitive. Firm name, any firm registration, contact details, and so on. Next slide, please. This is where the opportunities are. The opportunities allow you to basically filter by notice type, and notice type can be general procurement notices, which basically give you an idea of future opportunities. It can be invitations for tenders, invitations for pre-qualification, invitations to submit proposals, and so on. So you can filter on that base. You can see whether the opportunity is open or just for information. You can see the deadlines and so on. Next slide, please. You can click on a link. You can see the details, and then you can click access opportunity. That will take you straight to the document, provided that you are already registered. This is your your task manager, you have the response manager, you can search for opportunities, you can manage it, you can manage your account, you can have a look at all the opportunities that you have responded to or that you are in the process of drafting a response for. And then finally, I would like to close with a couple of general tips and hints about consultancy procurement, which are valid both for client and contracted. Next slide, please. The first is only submit proposals in response to a request or procurement notice. EBRD does not formally take into account unsolicited proposals. With the proposal documentation, there will normally be up to 3 questionnaires: qualification questionnaire, technical questionnaire, and financial questionnaire. I'm calling these questionnaires because that is what SMART, our new system, likes to call them. But essentially, they are forms. Qualification form, the qualification questionnaire contains a number of questions which were already kind of spread throughout our old existing RFP documents, but have now been put here together for more clarity. This involves things along the lines of: you are invited to confirm that you have not been found guilty or have not been debarred of anything related to prohibited practices, that you have not engaged in dodgy fiscal and financial structures, and a range of others. The qualification criteria will often depend on the nature of the assignment, but they are quite common. Technical questionnaire is the meat and bones. This is where you are asked, if we are asking for a methodology, this is where the methodology comes in. This is where your team structure comes in. Financial questionnaire is your financial proposal, where you price it out. If you have questions and queries, for SMART, there is a discussion forum which is related to a specific process. This is probably the best way to communicate, because this way it is easily accessible to all the advisors in my department, and that is good because it means that if you send email to somebody and that person is on leave or not available, it is difficult to access. And just as a reminder, as a supplier, you need to be registered to participate, but you need to be approved to be awarded a contract. By the way, approval also includes inclusion of bank details so that we have a clear idea which bank we can make payments to. This is very important because in principle, in order to get around potential hacks and attempts to divert money, and we have encountered a few of them, we will only make payments to the bank account that is part of your registration. Just this is quite important. Next, please. So tips on winning. The first is read the RFX documents carefully. RFX stands for request for, and this can be tender, proposal, expression of interest, or anything similar. Keep in mind, previous EBRD experience is not a prerequisite. So you will only very rarely find a requirement that says you have to have experience in EBRD projects. The cases where it doesn't happen are mistakes, not precedent if you find it. And you should feel free to point this out to us. Important, do your research. Check that you are familiar with the requirements. Check also, for instance, that you meet eligibility criteria. Do you have a potential conflict of interest or not? Again, conflict of interest, it is not an absolute exclusion criterion. Conflicts of interest can be mitigated, and a proposal will only be rejected if the consultant cannot demonstrate a satisfactory way of mitigating a conflict of interest. Think carefully from where you might bid. This is something that I have put in because there is an important difference in the logistics involved. If, say, you bid from your American office for an assignment in Azerbaijan, or you bid from your Turkish office for an assignment in Azerbaijan, keep that in mind because you need to take into account things like flights and so on, which are more expensive from the United States and so on. Always think about working with others to strengthen your bid. If you think you do not have all the necessary expertise in-house, you can go to joint ventures, you can go to associations, you can go to local counterparts. we're quite liberal with this. We do not, for instance, on the consultancy side, have any strict requirements saying, well, at least 60% of the value or the staffing has to be provided by the main consultant. This is essentially for consultants, because consultants is a people's business, and consultants' business models can vary. You can have huge firms which have a lot of permanent staff. You can have firms which are, to a large extent, skeleton companies who then flesh out their particular proposals with a series of freelancers, which would, of course, be a form of subcontracting. So we are quite open to that. And then finally, and I don't put it on there because it's kind of self-evident, but do not do stupid things. Yeah. And recently, a month ago, I came across, nothing to do with EBRD, but I still thought it was funny, a decision by the US General Accounting Office, which is kind of the institution which reviews complaints against procurement in the US, who rejected a protest by a bidder who said that the contracting authority had unjustly rejected their proposal because the contracting authority considered that including Johannes Gutenberg and Nikola Tesla was not really serious. The GAO remarked these are undoubtedly very capable people, but Gutenberg died in the 16th century and Tesla died in 1943. So it is reasonable to assume that they would not be available to perform this assignment, therefore rejected. That kind of thing, which brings me to something else that is often asked, and maybe I haven't looked at the Q&A yet, but I expect this one to come up, and this is about feedback. As part of our transparency, if you wish to have a better idea of if your proposal was not selected, if you wish to have a better idea of why it was not selected, you are entitled to get feedback. However, one thing that I always caution people about is you want to keep your expectations about feedback at a suitably low level. The reason is this: how do we conduct technical evaluation? Because that's usually what it's about. We have 3 people or more who fill out an evaluation grid, score against weighted evaluation criteria, which adds up to an overall score. All the scores, then the overall score is the average of the scores of each individual member. Now, on that basis, it is impossible for me to explain to somebody why they got 87 out of 100 and not 88 out of 100. There are limits to what you can explain through that model. And I do understand the frustration that people feel when hearing this. But the problem is, so far, I have not really been able to come up with another model. One thing that we tried several years ago at the insistence of our Moroccan clients up front, they said, well, we're not going to do this subjective. We're going to have scores, but up front, we're going to say, if this, then so much. If this, then so much. If this, then so much. The problem with that is that we ended up with 5 consultants having identical scores because they all scored the highest because they were providing what was requested. So a degree of subjectivity is always going to be part of this. And I do understand how frustrating it can be. Why did I get 87? Why did the other guy get 88? I don't know. I can't explain it to you, because overall the amalgamated opinion of more than 3 people who scored against, in some cases, 20 evaluation criteria mathematically adds up to that. It's unfortunate. What we can give very clear feedback about is when something has gone catastrophically wrong. Example, you have included financial information in your technical proposal. That is definitely not a good idea. You did not submit a financial proposal, true case, or you submitted blank pages as your financial proposal, even electronically, which is kind of an achievement, I think. Those are very clear cases where we can say, this is what went wrong. This is what you did wrong. Other than that, in some cases, the only thing we can offer is mathematics, the law of averages. And I am aware that this can be slightly frustrating. The next slide is my final slide, and this just contains my contact details, and this concludes the main part of my presentation. I now have time for Q&A, so please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your. What we liked is that you went through all the single step of the registration. I think that's so important for everybody to be guided step by step. in what to do. So before we run the Q&A, I will start with a couple of questions which are already in. Let's see. I don't know if you can see them. Okay, this is a typical question we get all the times. What is the percent? This is about projects. I'm not sure it's about consultancy, but since we are a country of small and medium-sized companies, maybe you want to address this.
Yes. What is the percentage of projects that EBRD go to small and medium-sized companies? We do not have any specific data on this. What I can say, however, especially on the consultancy side, that we often, okay, it depends on your definition of SME. Yeah, it's kind of a flexible notion because Deloitte, for instance, is a big company, except that it's not really a company. It's a conglomerate of a lot of companies. So technically speaking, a Deloitte office in one of our countries of operation can meet the definition of an SME. But for practical purpose, let's exclude that. I think there are a fair number of consultancy contracts which go to smaller firms, which have boutique specializations. EBRD occasionally comes up with things that we want to do and for which we don't need the logo, or we don't need the huge manpower that, say, one of the big four firms can provide or something similar. And then we can easily resort to a smaller firm. Now, one thing to keep in mind: a lot of these assignments tend to go on direct selection, which go unpublished. One question I often get, and maybe it's part of the pipeline: how do you have access to the direct selection? The best way to get access to direct selection is to make yourself known. EBRD, I mean, I used to say, when you're in London, when you come over to London, you know, step by the EBRD, make an appointment, work through the Italian constituency office to try and set up some appointments. It's not really an option right now. I travel frequently in and out of the UK, and the experience is not one of the most pleasant ones, and definitely not cheap. But in our resident offices and so on, the best way is to basically make yourself acquainted with our business and make yourself acquainted with the people on the ground, and also register. Simply register. Why register? Not because, okay, first of all, because we are hoping to develop our registration database into a more genuine database where teams can go into and look, okay, we're looking for a particular type of expertise. We're not there yet. It's a new system that we're running, and we're still trying to figure, to a large extent, we're still trying to figure out how the damn thing works, to be honest. So there is that. Become acquainted. I think once we start traveling, EBRD will once again start its business development opportunities, where we will have where we will have bankers and other teams traveling to our member countries and so on for business development. These are all options. Other options include, most of our user departments have contact details on the EBRD's website. By user departments, I mean the departments inside the EBRD, which will actually be managing the consultants. And that's not POD, except in a couple of cases where we need consultants for ourselves. So we're not subject matter specialists, but the other people are. If you want to send promotional material or even try to get a call via Zoom or whatever, probably best to contact the departments directly if you think that you can provide services which are of use to them. And I think that's probably one of the better ways for smaller firms to promote themselves.
Thank you. That's very clear. Regarding this, do you have anything set up like the brown bag lunch at the World Bank? Is there anything similar in EBRD?
Not right now. There isn't, because there's absolutely nobody in HQ. But it is something. I mean, there are also occasions like these where we can have these discussions. But I do think that the idea of brown bag lunches is actually quite good. What we have also had is that professional associations or donor governments organize missions to the EBRD or vice versa. I've done both. And again, right now this is more difficult because of travel restrictions. So it's it's a bit tricky. It's a bit tricky right now.
But it's a good idea to go through the constituency. That's a good advice and good tip you gave us through the Italian constituency. Maybe that would be a safe avenue in the foreseeable future. I have somebody raised their hand. There is a question from, let us allow her to talk, Paola Baldovin. I don't know if she raised it by chance or she wants to really ask a question. Let me try. Paola, you can speak. Paola può parlare, può accendere il microfono. Ok, prego Paola.
Sì,
Paola,
va
non la sentiamo.
Va benissimo. Ok.
Prego, adesso la sentiamo, prego, faccia la sua domanda.
È qua? Sì, sì. Aspetta che... Sì, lo avviso e...
Okay, maybe it was a thing. Let's go to the next question in the meantime from the audience. We've got another question from Giada Platania. How long does a payment procedure take for a consultancy?
It depends. I mean, we have quite detailed rules for the preparation of invoices, and if those are complied with, usually we can turn payment around in something like 10 working days. That's for bank contracted. For client contracted, it usually takes longer because first it needs to go to the client. We tend to receive a copy, but we won't release any payment before the client has formally approved this. So there is an intermediary step there. But in general, under the best circumstances, our payment processes are actually quite quite efficient. I must say. Like I said, if it comes in, depending on workload of the invoicing department, 10 working days is not unrealistic. It's certainly less than the standard 30 days.
Perfect. Now that's great news to know. Okay, let's move to the next one. So, Gabriele Quinti, thanks for this opportunity. We are a research and capacity building center working on societal issues related to energy transition, climate change, good governance, and science-society relations. We had many contracts in the past with the World Bank. We visited EBRD 20 years ago, and it was explained to us that EBRD is focused mainly on hard projects like infrastructure and does not need consultancy service on societal issues. Is the situation changing recently?
Okay, there are several aspects to it. This is a question on which there are several aspects to the answer, I think. So first of all, I think we need to keep in mind that unlike, say, the World Bank, the EBRD does not make investments into, say, public services in general. The service of education, the service of healthcare is not something we would tend to invest in. What we might invest in is infrastructure that underpins it. For instance, things that we have worked on is public-private partnerships for healthcare facilities, where we look at the buildings. That said, I mean, as you are aware, EBRD was set up to turn all the former communists into good capitalists. Some might make the argument that we have kind of overdone it a little bit, but EBRD's focus since about 2012 has shifted away from this classic version of market-oriented reform towards what we call the new transition qualities, and these include things like resilience, sustainability, and so on. Especially in terms of energy efficiency, since 2004, energy efficiency financing has been one of our spear point products, and it's what we now call green economy transition. Again, it focuses a lot on the economic aspects. It then focuses on productivity. It focuses on, but with a green touch. One of our spear point programs, for instance, is the Green Cities initiative, where basically in the public sector we work with cities, municipalities in our countries of operation, with a focus on making their infrastructure more sustainable. And this can be through classic energy efficiency, reusable energy. One aspect that we have developed is, and again, this is not a goal in and by itself, but this is something that attaches itself to to the basic infrastructure project. We also look at certain societal aspects, gender equality, ensuring that vulnerable population groups are not excluded, and so on. But again, our core is still focusing on development of economic activity, not so much on the side of public services. But for instance, energy efficiency is something that may run throughout every project that we do. Energy efficiency can exist in and by itself, or renewable energy. We build a windmill park, or we develop a new form of infrastructure, say new buses. Rather than go with old diesel ones, we would say, how about hydrogen? How about hybrid? How about electrically powered? So in that case, we have shifted a bit. So there is, I think, more attention to certain societal aspects, but we still want to keep it. We still want to keep in mind that one other, for instance, when we work in private sector, say the tourism industries, we also try to stimulate opportunities for local unemployed groups with high levels of employment to be given apprenticeship programs and basically train up for work. But again, everything is still attached to a particular project, and that tends to be a form of infrastructure.
Perfect. Okay, so we have the final 3 questions, and oh, there is some coming in still. Okay, let me run this. These are 2 questions regarding your presentation I had. One is about the Dun & Bradstreet code, which appears when you're filling out registration. Does that mean that EBRD runs a background check on that specific consultancy based on the report of Dun & Bradstreet? And what about if that is negative? Does that affect my chance?
It depends on why it's negative. Okay, first of all, we don't make it an absolute condition, because we know that not everybody has a Dun & Bradstreet background check. It was just part of the design. We might do, but usually prior to contracting, which is to say, if there's a negative report, a credit report, what are the odds? And we might tailor our approach to that. For instance, if somebody has a slightly tainted report on Dun & Bradstreet, we might require an additional advance payment guarantee if we pay out in advance. For instance, I wouldn't use it to exclude somebody, but I would use it as a risk mitigation tool rather than a risk avoidance tool. The question of registered versus approved.
Yeah, again, do I get an edge if I'm an approved consultant? Does that make my bid more appealing to you?
No, because when the evaluation committee actually reviews the bids, they don't actually see the registration of the consultant. The big difference is you need to be approved if you want a contract to be issued. Yeah. So you can be selected. If at that point you're not approved, we send you a reminder and say, can you please make sure that you fill out whatever's missing so that we can approve you. Then if a consultant decides not to fill it in and not get the approval, then there's only so much you can do. And then finally, efficiency versus price.
How many times did you have to overrule? You were mentioning at the beginning that for you it's so important efficiency, while your finance department are always thinking about the lower price. Yeah. I was wondering how many times did you need, or were you capable to overrule the objections of the finance department?
I mean, ultimately, my department plays a role in saying, look, guys, you come in with this is not going to happen. It's not going to be enough money, and in most cases, people back down. In some cases, they don't. And usually, as it turns out, we publish the procurement note. It becomes a case of show, don't tell. Usually, if it's too low, we only get so little interest that it becomes quite clear that this is not going to work. Then we go back to the team and say, we told you so, and then the team has to restart. And that kind of expertise that we have has become appreciated. So when people say, when we tell people, guys, not enough money, not going to happen, they tend to go back. Now, there's one other thing I have to say, especially when it comes to consultancy. The finance department in the EBRD is very strong and very pernickety when it comes to the use of banks' administrative budget. When it comes to donor funding, it's more an issue of what the donor is willing to accept. The finance department will have less a look at that because it doesn't come out of their pocket. And again, as I mentioned, a donor is probably more willing to pay 500,000 for something than 250,000 for nothing, essentially, because they too are looking to get results from their contributions. And 250,000 for zero results, that's not a good deal at all.
Absolutely, thank you. So we have some final questions. Questions are pouring in now. So I'd like you, if you could give, since we are almost running out of time, to allow everybody to get an answer, if we could give fast answers to the next questions. So let's start with, let me share the screen again. Here we are. Okay, first question from Bernadette Penta. So I didn't get the difference from the two platforms. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. SMART is used for EBRD bank contracted. ESEP is used for EBRD client contracted. The opportunities on, if you have an opportunity on ESEP, you can only submit through ESEP. If you have an opportunity on SMART, you can only submit through SMART. So the only time you need to look at both is at the moment when the opportunities are published. If you see there's one on ESEP that I like, you go through ESEP. If there's one on SMART that you like, you go through SMART.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's go to the next one. Okay. This is from Salma Elamar. I would like to be sure that corporate opportunities are published online on the GEP website, while client contracted opportunities are on ECCP website. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Let's go for the next one. Our company, Advice Consulting, creates agricultural projects and realizes them, mostly operating in CSI countries. Is the sector of horticulture, agriculture in general considered?
Yes, in the EBRD, we have a big department which is called Industry, Commerce and Agribusiness. Agribusiness and food security in particular are a big part of EBRD's investments. It's mostly private sector though, which means that it attracts a lot less donor money than others. So in terms of what EBRD would finance as consultancy, it's probably a bit limited, but there are a lot of projects. And if you are assisting potential clients of EBRD in developing projects in the agribusiness, and by agribusiness I mean basically from field to consumer, the entire supply chain and everything in between. Horticulture, I can't swear to that, but I do have a vague recollection that once we had an assignment looking at transposition of tulips, and I think, well, this being tulips, I think we engaged a Dutch consultancy for that. But yeah, there is potential for horticulture there, yeah. It's just that I don't think it's one of the most common. Core agribusiness, which is more focused on food, is probably more common.
Thank you so much. Yes, in fact, he precised in his question, then it's for investment, he means, yeah. Mr. Chadwa. Okay, now we have another question from Nora Sanna. Is it necessary to attach financial documentation or RFP, for example, balance sheet, economic statement translated into English and certified by an external auditor?
Norma, for corporate procurement, most cases not. You would only have to do that if it were specifically asked, and we would only specifically ask for it in a number of limited situations. And this is usually not so much on the project side, but usually on the corporate side, where we might be engaging a consultant for a long duration and we want to ensure that they have been in existence and that they have a healthy balance sheet. It might be different on the project side if you're applying for goods, works and services, because there often it tends to be a longer term commitment, and we need to ensure that the contractor has the capability and the financial ability to at least purchase the materials and the tools. On consultancy, we rarely ask for it simply because we don't think that we get any real value out of asking that kind of information.
Thank you. Let me see. Okay, here is the last one which poured in. Let's give it a shot. Okay, let me share it, please. I guess from Maurizio. So last year, we submitted a technical and financial proposal for a tender in Belarus, despite several emails sent to the bank contract person. We never received any feedback. How to get such information even if a year has passed? Is there any way for this? Do you have any advice, Joanna?
Okay. So despite several emails to the bank contact person. Okay. First of all, I'm going to dodge the question and say that I'm not familiar with this particular project. The only thing I can say, you should have received a reply. The only excuse that I can make is last year was a bit of a crisis year for the procurement operational delivery department, which is one of the reasons why I got parachuted at the helm of the department for now until the end of the month. And things might have slipped. I've taken note of the selection number, and I'll ask the head of the consultancy unit to have a look at it and see where we are at. Now, keep in mind, this being Belarus, and Belarus being politically slightly unstable, shall we say, it is not impossible that that project is on hold. And it's actually quite possible that we may have to inquire with the user team what is going on. Just keep that in mind. But I've got the number written down, and I'll ask around. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I guess this was the last question. I'm happy that we got all these questions answered, and thanks you for your patience. And now, for a couple of final remarks, let me introduce the word for a few final remarks in Italian to Roberto Lovato, who's heading the office. He will share a couple of words with our Italian participants. Roberto, prego per le conclusioni. Grazie. Il microfono, ok, great.
Grazie a tutti i partecipanti, grazie a Deutsche per aver collaborato con noi nell'organizzazione di questo seminario. Grazie in particolare a Mr. Johan Bert. Thank you very much, Mr. Bert, for your very fruitful collaboration. Mr. Bert ci ha illustrato le opportunità offerte dall'EBRD nel settore del partenariato, del consulting, ed è un settore in cui le aziende italiane hanno negli ultimi anni mantenuto un peso significativo a livello internazionale. Sicuramente fra i settori economici in Italia è quello che ha acquisito un maggiore peso nel settore dell'acquisizione di finanziamenti da parte di organizzazioni internazionali, di banche di sviluppo internazionali in particolare. Ecco, ed è proprio per questo, per il ruolo che OICE ha assunto negli ultimi anni a livello internazionale nel settore delle collaborazioni internazionali e del partenariato, che ICE Agenzia intende proseguire la sua collaborazione con OICE al fine di diciamo utilizzare anche l'associazione OICE e le proprie competenze come traino per le attività dell'intero comparto industriale italiano e dei servizi, per indurre una maggiore partecipazione ai progetti proposti e finanziati da organismi multilaterali internazionali. E con questo impegno io ringrazio nuovamente tutti i partecipanti, gli amici di OICE per questa fruttuosa collaborazione, lo speaker Johan Bert per la sua partecipazione, ovviamente il mio collega Dino Previte per diciamo il lavoro di regia veramente pregevole, e ovviamente do appuntamento a tutti agli prossimi seminari e prossimi appuntamenti, il primo fra i quali è il prossimo 21 giugno e riguarderà appunto le iniziative dell'Asian Development Bank. Bene, non mi resta che ringraziare tutti nuovamente e augurare a tutti un arrivederci. Thank you and goodbye. Arrivederci.
Thanks. Bye bye.
You. Bye.